Sometimes, family is the most dangerous thing you'll ever know. It's meant to protect you, support you, and love you. But for Kayla Thompson, the ties that should have kept her safe led her straight to her death. She was a young heiress, loved by her father, a girl with the world at her feet. But there was something else, something that twisted the very heart of the family she trusted the most. A father who promised to always protect her, a stepmother who quietly bided her time, and a half-sister with a secret she was willing to kill for. The woods that day were supposed to be peaceful, an innocent escape from the noise of life. But it became the scene of a gruesome act, a betrayal so deep it would shake their world to the core. Everyone thought they knew who did it. Everyone thought it was Brittany, her stepsister, consumed by jealousy. But that's not the whole story. No. There's a darker truth hiding in the shadows of this family's twisted legacy. Kayla Thompson was born into a world where everything was handed to her on a silver platter. At just 18 years old, she was the only child of Thomas Thompson, a wealthy entrepreneur known for his fortune and influence. To the world, she seemed like the perfect daughter, adored by her father, the apple of his eye. But her life, despite the wealth and admiration, was not as flawless as it appeared. Her mother, a kind woman who once ruled the family with grace, passed away when Kayla was still young. In the aftermath, her father remarried, a woman named Vanessa. At first, it seemed like a fresh start, a second chance at happiness. But beneath the surface, the dynamics began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. Vanessa, with a past full of its own demons, wasn't quite the mother Kayla had hoped for. And with her came her own daughter, Brittany. From the moment Brittany stepped into their home, there was an unspoken tension between the two girls. They were family by title, but the bond they shared was nothing more than a fragile thread. They lived under one roof, but as the years passed, the gulf between them only deepened. Kayla, the heir to her father's massive fortune, held a place of privilege, one Brittany could never reach. While Kayla's position was secure, her stepsister Brittany lived in the shadow of her more fortunate sibling. Vanessa, now the head wife, saw herself as the rightful matriarch, but the real battle was just beginning. For Brittany, Kayla wasn't just her stepsister. She was a symbol of everything Brittany could never have: affection from their father, the inheritance, the life that seemed to come so easily. The resentment simmered beneath the surface, unnoticed by the one person who should have seen it coming: Thomas. But why? Why would Brittany, who had grown up alongside Kayla, turn against her in such a brutal way? Why would a young woman, raised in the same household, commit such an unimaginable crime against a person she was supposed to love? Was it really jealousy, or was there something darker at play in this twisted family? The truth, as we will soon uncover, is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. One bright and seemingly innocent afternoon, Brittany invited her stepsister Kayla out to the woods. The invitation seemed harmless enough: a picnic, an escape from the busy world. The kind of afternoon where the air is fresh, the sky is clear, and all the stresses of life seem to fade away. For Kayla, it was just another quiet day, a chance to enjoy the nature around her. But for Brittany, it was something more. There was something cold behind her eyes as she made the invitation, something that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," she said when she called Kayla. "I think we should just go out to the woods and enjoy the day. It'll be nice, just us." But what Brittany didn't say was that it wasn't just a picnic she was planning. No, it was something far more sinister. As they arrived in the woods, Kayla was unaware of the storm that was brewing inside her stepsister. Brittany led her into a secluded area, a quiet place away from prying eyes. It was peaceful, too peaceful. The birds were singing, the wind rustling through the trees, and Kayla, ever the trusting soul, had no reason to believe that this peaceful day would turn into her last. But then, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, something changed. Brittany's movements grew sharper, more calculated. The tension was thick, suffocating even. As she spoke with Kayla one final time, her voice low and almost unreadable. "You don't understand," Brittany said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've had everything, everything that was mine." Kayla, confused and unaware of the depths of her stepsister's hatred, could only reply with, "What are you talking about, Brittany? What do you mean, everything?" But Brittany wasn't looking for understanding. With a swift motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sharp knife. She was quicker than Kayla could react. With one swift slash across Kayla's throat, the world around them seemed to freeze. Kayla gasped, her hands instinctively going to her neck as blood poured out, staining the earth beneath her. In the final moments of her life, Kayla's eyes met Brittany's. There was no remorse in those eyes, just a cold determination. Brittany, the stepsister who had once called her family, was no longer a sister. She was a stranger. Kayla's body crumpled to the ground, her breaths growing shallow as she struggled to stay conscious. Brittany stood over her, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a kind of frantic energy. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she stood over her dying sister. Kayla's final words were barely a whisper. "Why, Brittany? Why?" But those words would never be answered. When it was over, when the final breath left Kayla's body, Brittany's work was just beginning. She had to make sure there were no traces left behind. No one could know the truth. She went to work mutilating Kayla's body, cutting it into pieces, all in a desperate attempt to cover up the murder. At least, that's what the world would later believe. But something wasn't right. As investigators began to piece together the events, they found that Brittany's actions were not as they seemed. The pieces of the puzzle slowly started to shift, and the truth began to emerge, not just about Brittany's involvement, but about the true mastermind behind the crime. How did it all go so wrong? Was Brittany truly acting on her own jealousy, or was someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? It was a question that no one had an answer to, until the truth about Thomas Thompson, Kayla's father, came to light. Thomas Thompson, a man who had been adored by many, was revealed to be hiding a darkness that no one had ever seen. Beneath the calm exterior of a successful businessman, his mind had been slowly unraveling for years. What seemed like a strong and loving father was actually a man consumed by delusion and instability. His love for Kayla was undeniable. He had raised her since birth, protected her from the world, and promised to care for her no matter what. But as the years went on, his obsession with her grew. It wasn't just fatherly love anymore. It was something deeper, more possessive, more toxic. Psychiatrists who later evaluated Thomas's behavior revealed that his mental state had deteriorated significantly. He had been battling with severe mental health issues for years, his grip on reality slipping further with every passing day. He couldn't bear the thought of Kayla growing up, becoming independent, and, perhaps more importantly, taking control of her inheritance, a fortune that Thomas believed was rightfully his to control. Was his love for Kayla so overwhelming, so consuming, that he couldn't bear to see her leave him behind? Was it this overwhelming possessiveness that led him to commit the unthinkable? What happened next was a revelation that would shock the world. It wasn't Brittany who had delivered the fatal blow to Kayla. It wasn't jealousy that drove her to kill. No! The true mastermind behind this gruesome act was none other than Thomas himself. Thomas had orchestrated the entire murder. He had manipulated Brittany, turning her into his pawn to cover up the crime. From the very beginning, Thomas had been pulling the strings, making sure Brittany would be the one who was blamed, making sure his own hands were clean. At the time, no one suspected a thing. Thomas, the grieving father, stood by his wife's side, pretending to mourn the loss of his daughter. But inside, his mind was a whirlwind of delusions and manipulation. He had made sure that Brittany was the one who took the fall. He made her believe that killing Kayla was the only way to secure their future. But why? Why would a father, who had once claimed to love his daughter more than anything, go to such extremes? Was it simply about the inheritance? Was it about control? Or was it something far more twisted? The truth, as it turned out, was that Thomas had always seen Kayla as his. Not just as his daughter, but as a prize to be kept for himself. And when he felt that she was slipping away, when he feared that the world would take her from him, he snapped. And so, he turned Brittany, the girl who had always lived in her stepsister's shadow, into his weapon of destruction. As investigators pieced together the evidence, they began to see the extent of Thomas's manipulation. He had carefully planned every detail, making sure that Brittany would be the one to carry out the crime, all while remaining in the background, free from suspicion. Can you imagine what Brittany must have felt when she realized the truth? Had she been a mere pawn all along? Did she know deep down that her father was the one who truly wanted Kayla dead? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place. The truth was finally coming to light. But the questions were just beginning. Why did Thomas, a man who had once loved his daughter, go so far? Was it his obsession with her? Or was there something darker in his past that led him to commit such an unthinkable act? What do you think? Was Thomas driven by madness, or was this a crime born of pure, twisted desire? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As investigators began their deep dive into the murder of Kayla Thompson, the first few pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit perfectly. It appeared as though Brittany had acted out of jealousy, an impulsive act driven by the envy of her sister's wealth and position. But as the investigation continued, something wasn't adding up. There were whispers of a far darker story, a father's love that went too far, a manipulation too deep to understand. The more the authorities dug into the details of Thomas Thompson's life, the clearer it became that he had been hiding something far more sinister. While his outward appearance was that of the grieving father, devastated by the loss of his beloved daughter, his behavior told a different story. The evidence began to suggest that Thomas had been playing a role far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just that Thomas had been a father obsessed with control. No, there were signs in his life leading up to Kayla's death that pointed to something more disturbing. His mental state had been deteriorating for months, perhaps even years. But no one had seen the warning signs, not until it was too late. Thomas's behavior became more erratic in the months before Kayla's murder. He would go from a calm, collected father one day to an angry, unpredictable man the next. Neighbors described how he would sometimes lash out in frustration at small things, and there were even reports from those closest to him that suggested he was beginning to lose touch with reality. One particular incident stood out. A few weeks before Kayla's death, Thomas had been at a dinner party with friends. The conversation had veered toward his daughter's future, her plans to take over her father's estate, the vast fortune that came with it. It was a casual discussion until it wasn't. "You know, I've spent my entire life building this empire for her," Thomas said, his voice tight. "But I don't know." He paused, glancing nervously around the room. "Maybe she's not the right person to take it over. She doesn't understand the pressure of holding everything together." His friends exchanged uneasy glances. At that moment, it was clear that Thomas was no longer thinking of his daughter as the heir to his legacy, but as someone who could potentially jeopardize everything he had worked for. The cracks in his facade were starting to show. Was this the turning point? Had Thomas begun to plot his daughter's death weeks, or even months, before it actually happened? Was his mind already consumed with the thought of what he could lose? Or was it the sudden, explosive nature of his mental illness that pushed him over the edge, making him act on a momentary impulse that he could no longer control? As the investigation progressed, new revelations emerged about Thomas's troubled past. His marriage to Kayla's mother had been rocky, filled with arguments and growing distance. There were rumors that he had once been involved in an affair, something he had tried to keep hidden from everyone. Was his obsession with Kayla a result of deep-seated guilt over the mistakes of his past, the broken marriage, and the loss of his first wife? Psychiatrists who later evaluated him suggested that the guilt he carried from his failed marriage had festered for years, slowly eating away at his ability to make rational decisions. The feelings of inadequacy, the pressure of maintaining control over his family and business, all of it weighed heavily on him. And when Kayla became the focal point of his obsession, it triggered something dangerous. Brittany, on the other hand, had always been the secondary figure in her own home. As the daughter of Vanessa, Thomas's second wife, Brittany had always known that she would never inherit the wealth that Kayla would. She had always been the one standing in Kayla's shadow, a stepsister always second best. And while she may have resented Kayla for this, she never expected the chain of events that would unfold. The question that echoed in the minds of investigators and in the minds of those who followed the case was simple. How much did Brittany truly understand? Did she know that Thomas had been pulling the strings from the very beginning? Did she realize that in some twisted way, she had been manipulated into carrying out the act of murder? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but with each new discovery, new questions arose. It became clear that Thomas had orchestrated everything, from Brittany's invitation to Kayla for that fateful picnic to the brutal killing itself. Thomas had planned it all. He knew that his daughter's inheritance was at stake, and he was willing to do anything to keep it in the family. But what about Brittany? Was she an innocent pawn in her father's game, or was there something more to her involvement? What do you think, viewers? Was Brittany simply manipulated, or did she act out of her own jealousy and resentment? Was she a victim of her father's dark control, or was she complicit in the murder from the very start? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As more evidence came to light, it became apparent that Thomas's mental state was far worse than anyone had imagined. He had planned every detail, and he had convinced Brittany that what she was doing was for the greater good, for their family's future. Brittany, believing in her father's words, had been swept into a game she didn't fully understand. The question that lingered on everyone's mind was Thomas's love for Kayla so overwhelming that it drove him to kill her? Or was it about control? His desperate need to maintain power over the family, over the inheritance, and over the legacy he had built. It was a twisted family drama that no one could have predicted. A father who claimed to love his daughter more than anything, but in reality, was willing to sacrifice her life for his own greed and insecurities. The twists kept coming, each more unsettling than the last. And as the investigation unraveled, the real motive for the crime began to surface. Was it simply money and control, or was there something more sinister in the family dynamic that no one had seen before? Do you believe that Thomas was driven by a deep sense of entitlement, or was he truly haunted by his past mistakes? Was he a man pushed too far by his own delusions, or was his dark obsession something that had always been there? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the twists and turns of this shocking case. As the investigation drew closer to the truth, one thing was certain. This was a family that was forever changed by the lies, betrayal, and darkness that had been hidden for far too long. As the investigation unfolded, the truth that had been buried for so long slowly began to rise to the surface. The world had been stunned by the brutal murder of Kayla Thompson, and now it was time for the courtroom to decide the fate of the man responsible, her own father, Thomas Thompson. The case was no simple matter. It wasn't just about a man who murdered his daughter out of jealousy or a twisted family rivalry. No! The prosecution had a much darker story to tell. The defense, of course, attempted to paint a different picture. They argued that Thomas was a victim of his mental health issues, that his mind had deteriorated to such an extent that he was incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions. But was this really the truth? Was Thomas, in the throes of a mental breakdown, completely detached from reality? Or was there something more calculating behind the cold, methodical murder of his daughter? As the court battle began, it quickly became apparent that this case would not be as simple as anyone had hoped. The prosecution presented their evidence, laying out the details of Thomas's manipulation over the months leading up to Kayla's death. They painted a picture of a man who had been in control of every single aspect of the crime. From the first moments he plotted Kayla's demise, Thomas had orchestrated every detail, from manipulating Brittany into helping him, to setting up the perfect scene in the woods. The prosecution argued that his mental health issues did not absolve him of responsibility. In fact, it only made his actions more chilling. The very fact that he could plan something so horrific with such precision showed that he was in full control, not a victim of his own mind. But was Thomas truly in control? Had his obsession with his daughter and the family fortune pushed him to do the unthinkable? Could he have been so consumed by his delusions of grandeur and control that he believed killing Kayla was the only way to secure everything he thought was his? The trial was long drawn out and full of surprises. As each new piece of evidence came to light, it only seemed to raise more questions. Was Thomas driven by greed? Was he trying to protect his legacy? Or was his mental state so deteriorated that he truly believed his daughter had to die for the good of the family? Then, in a shocking twist, Brittany, who had remained largely silent throughout the investigation, took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she began to speak, her voice shaking as she recounted the events that had led her to play a role in the murder of her own stepsister. "I didn't want to do it," Brittany said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt Kayla, but my father, he made me believe that this was the only way. He said we needed to protect the family. He said it was necessary for our future." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Brittany, the girl who had once been the victim of her father's manipulation, was now revealing the depths of her own involvement in the crime. She admitted that Thomas had been plotting Kayla's murder for months. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully crafted plan, one that Brittany had been lured into without fully understanding the consequences. "I didn't know what else to do," Brittany continued. "I thought my father knew best. I thought he was trying to protect us. He said it was the only way we could keep everything. Our legacy, our future. He said it had to be done." The courtroom gasped. In that moment, everything changed. The truth that had been slowly building in the shadows finally came to light. Thomas Thompson had not only manipulated his daughter Kayla into a tragic death, but he had also manipulated Brittany, his own flesh and blood, into committing an act so horrific that it would haunt her for the rest of her life. Was Brittany a willing accomplice, driven by her own jealousy and desire to claim her place in the family? Or had she been a victim of her father's insidious control, unable to see the truth of his manipulation until it was too late? This unexpected twist left the courtroom and the world shocked. Thomas, the man who had once been viewed as a loving patriarch, was now exposed as a cold-hearted manipulator, someone who had used his own daughter's life as a pawn in a game of power and control. As Brittany's testimony unfolded, the depth of her father's manipulation became all too clear. She revealed that Thomas had spent months planning Kayla's death, using her own insecurities and fears to convince her that this was the only way forward. He had made her believe that killing Kayla would protect their family, secure their wealth, and preserve their future. But the questions that still loomed over the case were impossible to ignore. Was Thomas's manipulation a result of his mental health struggles, or was it a calculated act of greed and control? Could a man so obsessed with power truly be driven by love, or was his twisted love for Kayla simply an excuse to justify his actions? And what about Brittany? Was she simply a victim of her father's dark control, or did she have a part to play in the murder, driven by jealousy and resentment for the life Kayla had? The answers to these questions were as elusive as ever. As the trial continued, the world waited to see if justice would be served and whether Thomas would be held accountable for the lives he destroyed. What do you think, viewers? Was Brittany just another victim in her father's web of lies, or did she play an active role in the murder of her stepsister? And what about Thomas? Could his actions truly be explained away by his mental health struggles, or was this a man driven by a need for control? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. With each passing day, the case seemed to grow darker and the twists more chilling. As the world watched, they couldn't help but wonder, what would be the final outcome for the Thompson family? Would justice truly be served, or would this tragic story end with even more unanswered questions? As the trial drew to a close, the courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. After weeks of testimony, the final moments of the case had arrived. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the evidence heavy on their minds. In the end, the decision was made and the verdict was delivered. Thomas Thompson, the man who had once been adored by his family and the public, was convicted of murder. His obsession, his manipulation, his twisted love for his daughter had all culminated in the tragic, senseless death of Kayla. He was sentenced to life in prison, his once promising life now reduced to a solitary existence behind bars. But what of Brittany? She had been complicit. Yes, but she was not the mastermind. She had been manipulated by her father, drawn into a web of deceit and control that she hadn't fully understood. In the end, her testimony had uncovered the truth of her father's actions, but it also revealed the depths of her own pain and confusion. The court deemed her actions to be those of a young woman who had been emotionally and mentally coerced by a figure of authority. Brittany was given a reduced sentence. She would serve time in a psychiatric facility where she would receive the help she so desperately needed. However, as the case came to a close, the world was left with lingering questions. Questions that would haunt those involved for years to come. How far would a parent go to maintain control of their family? Could mental illness truly justify such an extreme act? Thomas had been a father who once seemed so full of love for his children, yet his actions were anything but loving. Was it his mental health that drove him to such an unfathomable place? Or was it something darker, something deeper within him that had always been there? And what of Brittany? Was she simply a victim of her father's manipulation? Or did she, too, share in the guilt of Kayla's death? Was she a pawn in her father's twisted game? Or did she knowingly participate in the destruction of her stepsister's life? What do you think, viewers? Was Brittany a helpless victim, or did she have a darker role to play in the tragic events? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The case may have been officially closed, but the questions did not end with a verdict. Kayla's murder had torn the Thompson family apart, but it also uncovered a web of secrets and lies that had been buried for years. The true nature of Thomas's mental health, whether it was the root cause of his actions or just a convenient excuse, remained a mystery. How far would a father go to maintain control over his family's legacy? Was it really just the inheritance, or was his desire to possess and control his daughters more powerful than the love he claimed to feel for them? And what about Brittany? The emotional scars she carried would never fully heal. The weight of the choices she made, the lies she believed, would follow her for the rest of her life. Was she simply a victim of circumstance, or was she complicit in the horror that unfolded? Could she ever reconcile the role she played in Kayla's death, or would the guilt and confusion forever haunt her? But beyond Brittany, there were still unanswered questions about the family itself. What else had been hidden behind the closed doors of the Thompson household? What other secrets did Thomas and Vanessa carry with them? Secrets that they had kept buried for so long. What impact would this tragedy have on the family's future, on Brittany's life after the trial, and on the memory of the daughter who had been lost to their dysfunction? When a family's darkest secrets are exposed to the world, there is no easy way to move forward. The truth may come to light, but the damage done can never be undone. Kayla Thompson's life was cut short by those she should have been able to trust the most. Her father and her stepsister. The family she thought would protect her had ultimately betrayed her in the most violent way possible. So, what happens next? Does justice truly heal the wounds of betrayal? Or does it only leave a scar that never fades? And when the dust settles, will those responsible for Kayla's death ever be able to live with what they've done? Will they ever find peace? Or will the truth continue to torment them long after the trial ends? This tragedy isn't just about a murder. It's about what lies beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family. The case of Kayla Thompson, her father Thomas, and her stepsister Brittany is not just a story of bloodshed and betrayal, but a chilling revelation of how easily control can slip from the hands of a father and spiral into something far darker. For a family that once appeared so ordinary, so untouched by violence, this case uncovered a darkness that no one could have predicted. Thomas Thompson, a man once admired by his peers and beloved by his daughter, transformed into a figure of manipulation, obsession, and cold-hearted betrayal. A father who claimed to love his daughter, who once promised to protect her from the world, only to take her life in the most brutal way imaginable. Was it truly his deteriorating mental health that led him to commit such an unspeakable act? Or was there something more sinister at play? Was it the inheritance, the fear of losing control, or something buried deep within him that ultimately drove him to murder his daughter? Then there's Brittany. Was she a victim of her father's manipulation, or did she play a more active role in the crime? Her silence in the beginning, her testimony during the trial. It all painted the picture of a young woman caught in the grip of a man she trusted, manipulated into a crime she never fully understood. But how much of it was truly manipulation, and how much of it was her own resentment, her own twisted desire to claim what Kayla had? Was she simply a pawn in her father's game, or was she complicit, choosing to participate in her stepsister's demise? As we piece together the events of that fateful day, as we hear the chilling words from Brittany herself during her testimony, the questions linger. Could she have stopped it? Could she have seen her father's descent into madness for what it was? Or was she too blinded by his control to know what she was doing until it was too late? What do you think? Was Thomas driven by mental illness? Or was his capacity for manipulation and control far more calculated than we realize? Was his love for Kayla simply an excuse to justify the dark acts he carried out? Or was there a deeper, darker need to dominate and possess what he could not control? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Brittany was manipulated by her father, or was she complicit in the crime from the start? This case doesn't end with just the arrest, the trial, and the final verdict. The Thompson family's fate, their shattered lives, and the haunting memories of what transpired will follow them forever. For Brittany, her life may have been spared a life sentence, but the emotional scars from this tragedy will never fade. And as for Thomas, locked away behind bars, his legacy will forever be marked by the darkest of deeds, an act so twisted, so incomprehensible, that it leaves us all wondering, could this have been prevented? As we close this chapter, remember that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we know the best. They hide in plain sight, behind the mask of a father's love, a mother's care, a family's bond. The truth, no matter how painful, has a way of revealing itself. But what happens after the truth is exposed? How do we move forward when the very people we trust to protect us become the ones who betray us? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more shocking stories like this one. Until next time, stay safe. And always remember to question the motives of those closest to you. The truth can be more dangerous than we ever imagined.